In July 2025, photographers spotted one of Europe's most wanted fugitives walking freely through the streets of Moscow. Not hiding, not disguised, just strolling. His name is Jan Marsalek, former chief operating officer of Wirecard, a company once valued at 24 billion euros. And what those photographs confirmed wasn't just that a fraudster had escaped justice. It was that the entire story of Wirecard's collapse was far stranger and far darker than almost anyone had reported. Because Wirecard wasn't just a fraud. It was, according to investigators, journalists, and intelligence officials across 3 countries, a financial empire with deep ties to Russian military intelligence, and the man who built those ties had been hiding in plain sight for years. Let's rewind. Wirecard was founded in Munich in 1999 as a small payment processing company. Think of it like the plumbing behind online purchases, the invisible infrastructure that moves money between your bank and the merchant. For years, it was unremarkable. Then Marcus Braun took over as CEO in 2002, and the company began an extraordinary transformation. By the mid-2010s, Wirecard was being called the crown jewel of European Fintech. It was processing payments for thousands of businesses worldwide. It had been admitted to Germany's prestigious DAX stock index, the 30 most valuable companies in the country, and its market value had surpassed that of Deutsche Bank. The financial press called it a miracle. German regulators treated it like a national champion. But here's the question that should have been asked much earlier. Where was all that money actually coming from? As far back as 2015, internal whistleblowers and later a team of journalists at the Financial Times, most notably Dan McCrum, began raising alarms. The FT published a series of investigative pieces suggesting that Wirecard's revenue figures didn't add up, that profits attributed to operations in Asia appeared to be fabricated, that auditors had signed off on accounts that were, at best, impossible to verify. Wirecard's response was aggressive. The company didn't just deny the allegations. It fought back legally, lobbied regulators, and somehow convinced Germany's own financial watchdog BaFin to investigate the journalists rather than the company. The FT reporters faced short-selling probes, critics were silenced or discredited. And then came June 2020. Wirecard's auditors at Ernst & Young announced they could not locate 1.9 billion euros, that's roughly $2 billion, that was supposed to be sitting in trust accounts at 2 banks in the Philippines. The banks denied the accounts existed. Wirecard's own auditors said they've been deceived for years. Within days, the company's stock collapsed by 90%. CEO Marcus Braun was arrested, and Jan Marsalek, the COO, the number 2 executive at one of Europe's largest companies, simply vanished. He crossed into Belarus within 48 hours of the scandal breaking, and then he was gone. Now here's where the story shifts from financial crime into something that reads like a Cold War thriller. Jan Marsalek had not just fled to Russia. According to reporting by the Financial Times, Der Spiegel, and Austrian investigative journalists, Marsalek had been working as an asset, a source and facilitator for Russian intelligence, specifically the GRU, Russia's military intelligence agency, for years before the collapse, possibly long before Wirecard became a global name. Think about what that means for a moment. The COO of a company processing billions of dollars in global payments, with access to financial data from thousands of merchants and millions of transactions, was reportedly feeding information to Moscow. A company trusted by banks, regulators, and institutional investors across Europe had a Russian intelligence operative sitting in its executive suite. But it gets stranger. Marsalek wasn't just passing along data. According to investigations reported by the BBC, the FT, and multiple European intelligence sources, he was also involved in a network of influence operations, brokering contacts between Russian intelligence figures and European political circles, and reportedly attempting to acquire samples of the nerve agent Novichok through GRU connections. That last detail is not confirmed as prosecuted fact, but it has been reported by multiple credible outlets citing intelligence sources, and it signals the scale of what investigators believe they were dealing with. This was not a rogue employee with bad judgment. This was, investigators believe, a deliberate and long-running penetration of a systemically important financial institution. So how did it go on for so long? Part of the answer is cultural. Germany's financial establishment had staked enormous prestige on Wirecard's success. When the Financial Times first raised doubts, the instinct of German institutions was to protect the company, not scrutinize it. BaFin, which had the power to investigate, instead filed a criminal complaint against FT journalists for market manipulation, a decision that has since been widely condemned as one of the most embarrassing regulatory failures in European history. Part of the answer is structural. Payment processors operate in an obscure corner of finance that most regulators didn't fully understand. The complexity was itself a shield. And part of the answer, investigators believe, is that Marsalek and those around him actively cultivated relationships with people in positions to look the other way. As of mid-2025, Marcus Braun has stood trial in Germany and is awaiting verdict on charges of fraud, market manipulation, and breach of trust. Jan Marsalek remains a fugitive, believed to be under Russian state protection in Moscow. An Interpol red notice has been issued for his arrest. Several other executives have faced charges in Germany and Austria. The victims of Wirecard's collapse are real and numerous. Retail investors lost billions, employees lost jobs and pensions. Small businesses that relied on Wirecard's payment infrastructure faced sudden disruption, and European taxpayers have borne the cost of years of regulatory failure and subsequent investigation. The photographs of Marsalek walking through Moscow in 2025 are significant not just because they confirm where he is. They confirm what investigators have long argued, that he is being protected, that his escape was not accidental, and that a man who knows what he knows about European financial systems, political networks, and intelligence operations is now an asset of a hostile foreign power. Wirecard's story is ultimately a story about what happens when greed and geopolitics collide inside an institution that the world chose to trust without verification. It's a warning about the gap between a company's story and its reality, and about how long that gap can persist when powerful institutions have a stake in not looking too closely. The money that vanished from Wirecard's accounts was never found. The man who may know where it went is in Moscow, and the regulator that protected Wirecard instead of its investors has since been fundamentally reformed, a reform that came 5 years and 24 billion euros too late. If you want to understand how financial fraud really works, not just the numbers, but the systems, the people, and the power that enables it, subscribe to this channel. Every week we cover the financial crimes and corporate collapses that shaped the modern world. And drop a comment below. Do you think Jan Marsalek will ever face trial? Because the answer to that question may tell us more about the current state of global power than any financial report ever could.